Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Vanderbilt Political Review. Guest today is Zachary Port. He's a freshman contributor. He recently wrote about the ICE situation in Minneapolis and how it justifies the use of civil disobedience, as we, of course, have seen en masse in that American city. So the conversation mainly revolved around that. The conversation went a little farther too. It started talking about the question of authoritarianism, whether that's implicated in ICE's action. And then we went back to that primary question of civil disobedience and whether or not that's, first of all, justified, but also whether or not it was prudent in that situation, and what can be done to ameliorate the situation in Minneapolis with ICE and just ICE in general, so that they can more productively achieve their goals. So that's the topic of conversation today. Without further ado, here's our episode. All right. It's an honor to have Zachary Port here on the Vanderbilt Political Review podcast.
Thank you.
Zach is a freshman from Boca Raton, Florida. As you can see, we did a little talking before this. Your latest article is about actually, I don't want to spoil it. I'll let you give a summary of your latest article, then we can go into it.
Yeah, so really briefly, my latest article was kind of talking about the situation in Minneapolis, kind of in defense of the civil disobedience that we've seen among a lot of the protesters and the citizens in Minneapolis, and a bit of a condemnation of what I've seen as some pretty authoritarian tactics from the federal government, particularly, ICE's rollout in Minneapolis.
Okay. Great summary. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sometimes you say, can you provide a summary? It's like, okay, But no, that was great. That was a perfect,
I appreciate it.
Perfect, concise summary. I guess I'll begin just kind of breaking down what you just said. So we'll just go step by step in each of the claims that you contained in your summary. So I guess the first part would be this question of authoritarianness, right? In the way ICE has behaved. I imagine you would say that authoritarianness, if you will, is not only in the way ICE is behaving de facto, but also how it's been framed and deployed, even from 2024 when the president was campaigning on this issue of doing mass deportations, et cetera. Right. I'd imagine that you'd also characterize that heavy-handed approach as being authoritarian, even in concept, even if on the ground things went better.
I mean, I don't necessarily think that's what I would argue. I think my argument here is that what's authoritarian is that, the citizens are being asked to kind of obey an organization. In the case of the rule of law, right? Obey the rule of law when there's been significant instances of that organization itself not following laws.
I see. So it's more of a rule of law point of view. Or approach to this question of authoritarianness instead of just the sheer exercise of authority is your concern.
Yeah, I mean, listen, we have the federal government. The federal government has the power to deport illegal immigrants. That's listed in the powers of the federal government, of the executive branch. And, even if I might not personally agree with that, that's not necessarily what I'm talking about here, and that's not necessarily where civil disobedience is supposed to arise. This specific instance is me saying that I believe, and I think there's significant evidence for ICE acting unconstitutionally. All
right, so I guess with that claim, what's one example that we can analyze, for instance?
Yeah, for instance, there were, I believe, just in the month of January, 96 court orders that ICE ignored. And the problem with that is, you have this much executive power being exercised. The judicial branch needs to be able to act as a check on executive power, right? And if agents are just ignoring these orders, which actually a conservative judge appointed by Bush, actually, I believe his name is Schlitz, outright kind of called these unconstitutional actions, especially, ignoring the courts. That's an instance of, law enforcement being lawless. And I don't even necessarily think that's my opinion. I feel like that's pretty self-evident.
Sure. I think that's a very fair point, insofar as it's a very it's a very reasoned point. I mean to say, right? I guess just to maybe partially play devil's advocate, but partially push back too. There was a case last year, and I'm going off of memory here. Obviously, if I thought of this precise point before, I would have researched it to have it down more. But there was a case last year in the Supreme Court, or maybe it's on the docket now for this year, and it was introduced last year, that dealt with the extent to which district courts can, to be rather blunt, just hold up the I might say prerogatives, you might say just the desires of a given executive, right? You have a district court in Texas say Biden can't do anything he wants. I'm of course using hyperbole here,
right?
But then you have like a court in Minneapolis or a court in California saying that Trump can't do what he wants to do. Do you think that plays into this at all, where you just have this phenomenon? This is not isolated, right? We've seen this, especially over the last decade, roughly, of courts of the opposite ideological leaning of the current administration obstructing their work. Do you think that might lead to a delegitimization of the court system that might make ICE or a given executive branch, I'll put it that way, feel emboldened to perhaps maybe skirt their rulings a bit? Or does it even matter if that's the case?
I mean, I actually do think that's a really good question and a really fair point. There's a difference between, just using the judicial branch to act as a check on executive power and then actually having like judicial activism, try to like pass like judicial legislation almost.
Or just be obstructionist of like a political side that they don't like, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I guess my point is that like that if that were the case, then I would definitely agree with you. But the fact that you have this Bush-appointed conservative judge outright calling what ICE's actions are doing, outright calling that unconstitutional and saying that like, it's not even a question of different opposing sides. It's a question of not really following the laws that are put in place.
Right.
I think.
Yeah. No, as I said, as I was saying earlier, I think that's a very fair critique to be made. No, I guess kind of returning to what I was saying earlier, do you think that that's more of a function of ICE and the way things have been managed, as we've seen over the last month, being sloppy? Not in that their entire mission is unjustified, in that the whole idea in and of itself of deploying them in such a manner is unjustified, but just that the way they have been particularly behaving and the way this has been particularly handled has lent itself to being a lot more open to court challenges.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing. Like, immigration is obviously a very hotly debated topic right now between both sides of the political spectrum, especially considering like the deportation of illegal immigrants. I'm not an open borders guy. I think that like ICE has a place in this country, but I guess my point is that yes, it is in fact the way ICE has kind of carried that out. It's the ignoring court orders. It's I believe just in the month of January alone, documented over 280 cases of wrongful detainment. Various instances of United States citizens being arrested just on the basis of racial profiling. ICE agents have literally said that they have arrested people just because they are Latino or Somali, which, granted, a lot of the illegal immigrants in Minneapolis are from those countries, but that's not basis for an arrest.
It's not sufficient for an future lawyer me here, that's not sufficient for an arrest. It might be sufficient for perhaps with other things too, not just by itself. Because like maybe the whole city, somehow like we're gonna stop the whole city now, Right. But like, let's say, I don't know, Minneapolis is not a good example because like there's so many Somalis there. But like, let's say like we know we have a lot of illegal immigrants from Central America and then like Eastern Africa, just to use these examples, right? And I'm in a place and I see someone who matches that description plus some other factor maybe. then I would say yes, that makes sense because and there was another case like this too that was saying how in that case it's not just you're not discriminating in that you're just arbitrarily singling that person out. No, like that feature you have makes you more likely to be in this class, which with another piece of reasonable suspicion or probable cause, whatever standard it hits, might justify looking into the situation. But certainly just them being Somali by itself is not enough reason for arrest. And that kind of links to the next point, which is a lot of critique has been placed, even from some parts of the right. And I think as time goes on, I find myself also there.
Yeah.
In that a lot of these ICE agents, if you remember, like last year, it was like, get your whatever $1,000 bonus to join ICE and, we'll put you through quickly. A lot of these ICE agents, new ICE agents, because I doubt it's the old guard that's having a lot of these problems. You're talking about like the wrongful detainment. I imagine it's a lot of the new people. They were really quickly trained. And my concern is, maybe you share this with me and maybe this loops into what you're saying, is that it was this rush to get all these ICE agents so quickly trained that allowed them, for example, not to understand the subtleties between, having reasonable suspicion and just having one potential element of that.
Right. I mean, that is a concern, but I also think part of their training, that was a bit intentional. I think when you have internal memos telling them to, ignore when the One Big Beautiful Bill was passed, they were told that the arrest can be made or like searches could be made with judicial warrants, right? But then months later, in I believe sometime this summer, a memo was last summer, right?
Yeah,
a memo was delivered through like ICE channels telling new agents that they could do these warrants through like administrative warrants, right?
Okay.
Which again, judges have found unconstitutional since they've been doing it because the law wasn't passed with that in mind, and they're trying to circumvent the judiciary by doing that. So I think, while yes, there is a very clear body of abuse that can solely be traced back to like a lack of training, I think part of it as well is kind of this internal lack of accountability from the higher ups in ICE.
Right. Yeah. And I guess a question that can flow from this is, as you just said, I'll just kind of pair back what you said to make sure I'm getting it right. Basically, there was one form allowed in the Big Beautiful Bill that was authorized.
Yeah.
Judicial warrants, which, correct me if I'm wrong, basically just like your typical warrant. You go to a judge.
Typical search warrant.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the administrative warrants would, again, if I'm wrong, correct me, would be by the fiat of DHS or whatever administrative agencies in charge, CVP. And that was not allowed in the Big Beautiful Bill, is what you're saying. And has that been the bulk of what judges have been saying is unconstitutional because it's violating, the written law? Or has there been other things too?
I'm not sure if that's exactly the bulk. I mean, that's definitely part of it. There's definitely also the wrongful detainment cases.
Right, yeah. Those.
There's the ICE officers impersonating local officers, which also isn't allowed.
Right. But that's a good point. I think it's a good segue to my next question, or maybe set of questions. It's like, not that what I'm about to say is going to excuse that per se, but there has been a notable lack of participation in like Minneapolis, for example, by local police officers. Like there's been a lot of ICE activity in Florida, for example, where we're from.
Right.
However, I think what's not wholly explanatory, but partially explanatory for the lack of rancor in Florida versus that of Minneapolis is that you have this more or less universal participation by local law enforcement, state law enforcement with the federal government that makes it just a lot more smoother to do. And then also like that plus just, how hard it is just to pass a bill nowadays.
Right.
And that gets into a whole conversation about just executive orders and all that stuff. But I guess my point is I guess it kind of pairs what I was saying earlier, like, is part of the reason why we're seeing this push, this natural, I would say, push to just go it alone as the executive, both in executive actions, but also in ignoring the courts in certain cases, or just kind of issuing, I guess, administrative memos that go a little farther beyond the actual text of the bill. Can all this be, at least in part, or maybe more than that, chalked up to just there being so many systemic barriers in the way because of the way our political system works now, that at least the feeling is to get anything done, to actually get this job done, this ICE job done, we just have to take matters into our own hands. And then again, does that even matter even if that's the case?
I mean,
that was a lot. I know. I just gave you.
All right.
I tend to do that in this podcast. Just like dump it all before you, and you pick up whatever you want to.
All right. Well, let me think.
Do with it. Yeah.
I think is that maybe part of the reasoning for why they're doing what they're doing, because they see kind of this dissidence in Minneapolis among like the local citizens and the local government in terms of a lack of cooperation. Is that their reasoning? Maybe. I mean, they also are really heavily targeting Minneapolis in general with Operation Metro Surge. So I think they kind of expected to need a lot more presence there in the first place. Just because it's what they call, a sanctuary city.
Right.
And a democratic stronghold. But again, I don't also really think that matters per se, because I don't think that justifies what they've been doing there at all.
Could you think of any set of political circumstances that would justify the executive saying, I hear you, courts, but for the common good of the community, like, you're being unreasonable here. You're saying I'm being unconstitutional, but quite frankly, I am not. Or not I, but we are not, right, as the executive. Or I see what this law says. Actually, this kind of happens kind of a lot. The law says this, but we're going to interpret it kind of more loosely to do what we want. Even if this situation does not rise to the occasion to overcome those procedural norms, right? Could you foresee any situation in which that's the case? Or should these procedural norms always be, no matter what, honored in your view?
Well, I don't know. I guess that kind of depends on what defines the common good, right? If the common good is whatever the executive defines it to be, that kind of gives them a lot of leeway to ignore the courts. And I guess that's why I'm in pretty strong defense of the judicial check on executive power here. Because, what the Trump administration and what the Department of Homeland Security defines as the common good might not be what, America and like its citizens defines as the common good.
Or what just is the common good.
Or what is the common good, right? Like, and I think there's no real definition of what the common good actually is, because I think that would look very different for me and you, for instance.
See, now we're getting into the philosophy. This is what I love about this podcast.
Right? So yeah, I guess that's my answer.
Yeah. Oh, I guess we'll pull on the string a little bit before I get to the other half, which is the civil disobedience bit.
Okay.
I would say, and people who have listened to this podcast before, this is going to be like, oh, he's going into this again. I'm like, okay. But I'll keep it brief this time. It's just like, I do think the common good is an objective thing that is constantly changing.
Okay.
So like I would say that there could be a set of conditions. It's kind of what I was getting at with the question. There could be a set of conditions in which it would make more sense for the executive to say, Civil War is a great example, right? Like Abraham Lincoln broke a lot of procedural norms, like the whole habeas corpus, like a lot of procedural norms, even our approach to the South after the war. I mean, like most of the South until the 1870s were military districts, obviously not what the founders were thinking, not exactly what I don't think the constitutional order was envisioning, but obviously a very, very serious situation that required that level of, again, as a common saying I say is like trying to pursue those substantive goods over the procedural norms. So I guess what I would say, and you can respond to this, is in this case, I'd have to look at each, situation. I haven't taken a deep dive into all the different court rulings and everything, but based on what I've seen, probably not in many cases.
Right.
Mainly because their conduct has kind of nullified, I think, any claim that they're truly in any prudential way acting towards towards a substantive good.
Right.
I think they've been very sloppy in Minneapolis. I think what I was saying earlier about the training problem, but I could see a situation. Let's say illegal immigration gets a lot worse, or was a lot worse, right? In which the courts are just like, no, you can't do that. Why? Well, it's unconstitutional. Just like, well, okay, well, come on, like we got to do what we got to do. That's how I would approach it. I'm not sure if you would. I guess the question basically is like, do you think that this is a particular situation in which it is not justified to overcome the procedural norms of honoring the courts, or do you think it's an absolute prohibition on ignoring the courts?
No, I think most situations you should probably follow constitutional procedure, and in the case of the Civil War, which again is probably one of the most extreme examples of needing to use executive powers, also probably is the most extreme example of crisis in our country's history. It was literally split apart. So me personally, I can't really justify it in this instance at all. Even if it gets a lot worse, there are other measures that can maybe be taken first.
But like what exactly?
That's a good question.
No, but I guess I'm not asking that question to get a precise list from you, but I'm asking that more to say, I can't think of any other thing that could be done that could not, or I'm trying to say, that also in theory would be able to withstand the same like the court challenges, the filibuster, like all these procedural norms that block action. I can see any approach to immigration running up against, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, I mean, here's an example, right? I was reading this morning, and then we'll go to the civil disobedience.
Yeah.
I think that might be interesting too. But I saw an example, a story this morning from Sweden, and don't quote me on the exact numbers,
right.
But in terms of legal immigration, because they just got so open in Europe, it's a whole different conversation. But basically, 1 in 4 Swedes aren't Swedes, as I say. They're from North Africa or Middle East, the Middle East, right? And the problem they've been having in Sweden is you basically have a lot of gangs coming in, because the problem in Europe has been, a lot of the migrants. Of course, some of them are families and women and children. A lot of them are young military-age men, and a lot of them are, and they come, in this case, Sweden, and problems arise, as you can imagine. These people are coming in en masse. They don't they're not Swedes at heart, obviously. They have allegiance primarily to, and I'm not even blaming them. It's just natural, like you have allegiance to your people, right?
Right.
And then problems occurred. A lot of gang violence. I saw a video where this guy was like shifting around or shipping around napalm. I'm getting too deep into it. The point is, what Sweden did is they're like, okay, we need to achieve some substantive goods here. We have procedural norms, but kind of screw that. They started detaining children. They started doing a lot of things that otherwise would gain a lot of international condemnation. And the Washington Post, I think, was it Wall Street Journal, one of them, this morning was publishing how I think the title was "How Did Sweden Avoid the Ire of Other Countries?" Right. The point of that is to say that I think there can be a point, short of outright civil war, that can warrant putting aside some of these procedural norms, like honoring every court decision that comes down the pike. And in response to that, if not, we can move on to the civil disobedience bit.
What exactly are you asking me then?
Well, I guess it's given the situation like what Sweden's going through, which is, I would say, worse than us. I don't think we have maybe MS-13, but it's certainly a much more of a smaller country. Right. 1 in 4 is not, we're not anywhere near those numbers. But I guess you were saying that you can imagine the bar being at Civil War, perhaps, at least that, right? For overcoming procedural norms. I guess I'm saying it's lower for me, maybe not as low as what we're going through right now, but it's lower for me. And maybe I guess I'm asking you is would you reconsider maybe bringing it down a bit from utter civil war? Can you see situations in which, maybe it's severe, but not as severe as a civil war, in which maybe it's okay to supersede what the courts say, or maybe what Congress says or the other, other checks on executive power.
I mean, like, I'm sure that, those instances, like examples of that might be the case. I'm just not necessarily sure where that line is.
Right. It was just
really
fair.
Sure where they are. Which is, I mean, and that's a good question. I think it's kind of important for us to know as a country, and especially, getting a little bit more into my opinions, I kind of get a little bit nervous when that line is crossed and it's by an executive branch that I, as well as, the data shows, the majority of Americans don't really trust the executive power in the country right now. So I guess that's my answer.
And I guess that brings us to the whole civil disobedience half of it.
Yes.
Do you want to summarize your general take on that, and then we can kind of break it down?
I mean, my general take on civil disobedience is not even necessarily my opinion. I feel like I'm more so just echoing, most supporters of democracy, in that civil disobedience is the act of peaceful, nonviolent protest or refusal to cooperate with the government when the laws that it is putting on you are unjust and discriminatory, and all other, institutional checks on power has failed. And it is the duty of the people of a country to resist in some way.
Okay. And I imagine you would say that, well, here's my question, I guess. Would you say that it'd be justified? How do I phrase this? Would you say that one is justified in doing civil disobedience only if their community, like they have some connection to the injustice, like directly, not just like I vaguely live in Minneapolis? Or would you say that, like, if an injustice is seen, it is justified for anyone who can see it to also be civilly disobedient? I'm just curious of like what your approach to this is.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I guess, just looking at historical examples, right? And this is a much more extreme version, right? I mean, I'm Jewish, right? So looking at Nazi Germany, an example of civil disobedience would be like, a German hiding a Jewish family, right? Or back, in the abolitionist period before the Civil War, during the Underground Railroad, when white people were helping, house slaves get them to the North. I guess they weren't really directly affected by it, because they weren't Jewish and they weren't, they weren't African American. But, I think that's justified.
Okay.
So, yeah, I guess you don't really need to be the person directly affected by it.
And the reason why I'm asking is because what I'm thinking of are those instances wherein you, quite frankly, Renee Good, right? Before, put aside the shooting, like the first half of it, if I'm not mistaken, but from everything I've seen, this is basically how it even came to be an issue, was her in some way negatively interacting with ICE,
right?
Because she was dismayed with what they were doing,
right?
Or just people in general who are citizens who should, putting aside like the couple of citizens that have been, but like in general, should not be that concerned or implicated by ICE's actions, being very involved in the civil disobedience to varying degrees, right? And I guess the question is, like, does it even, like, let's say it's an injustice, or let's say, I guess putting that aside, let's just say it's implicating, like people who are probably from Latin America, more or less, then Somalis and Minneapolis, but in general, that group of people. If you're a citizen, you're here, what is there to compel you to get in the face of an ICE officer? What's there to compel you to, do varying forms of civil disobedience as we've seen in Minneapolis? Or would your claim just be that because there's an injustice being seen, such confrontation is justified in the name of pushing back against the government?
Yeah, okay, well, I guess how it kind of stems is, people are entitled to not like ICE, right? I mean, that is part of, our First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, freedom of petition. So what happens, in my opinion, why I think they are justified in actively refusing to cooperate with ICE is that when they protested, they were tear gassed. And when people were just recording, they were detained and people's cars were pepper sprayed, like, you know, in their air vents. So it kind of went from protesting something that you don't agree with politically, which is, you know, of course, a fundamental right in America, to actively refusing to cooperate with an organization that actively infringes upon those rights.
So just to parry back what you're saying, make sure I'm getting it. You're basically saying that it might not have started as a direct implication of them, but it quickly grew into that once it became less. It became less ICE is just doing, you know, enforcement activities that we don't like, and then became, no, ICE is now violating our First Amendment rights.
Yeah,
and that itself became a point of protest.
Yeah, because I mean, my article probably wouldn't have been written if, you know, they never really infringed upon the rights of U.S. citizens. But that is not the case, and here we are. And that's why I think the example of civil disobedience in Minnesota and how the community came together is a really great example of democracy in action.
Okay. And I suppose a similar question as the last section would follow. Would you, and I'm not saying in this case, but I'm just saying more in general, because like one thing I like to do in these podcasts is trying to extract like broad principles that animate why you're saying what you're saying in your article. I guess, would you say that there could be situations in which, you know, protests should be less tolerated? I mean, of course, okay, let me rephrase that. Like, obviously, like, there are situations, I think we can think of them, like, let's say it's a very present emergency, and like, you want to go march in the street. No, we got to like get like the nuclear warheads down the street, you know?
Right.
But I mean, just even something like this, right, in which it's a very serious point of national concern, you know, having illegal immigration, right? You have agents doing their jobs, putting aside the ones that are acting improperly, you know, arresting people for looking at them, you know, like putting all that aside, you have an agent doing his job, and then you, even short of like obstructing a federal agent doing it, like actually a crime, like getting into his face, which trying to arrest someone, right? Yeah, it's clearly a crime. But like, might we say that it's just imprudent to be yelling at the cop even from across the street when he's trying to do his enforcement activities? Stuff like that, for instance, because I've seen instances of that too, where you just have these cops, these ICE agents just doing their thing, and then you just have people acting totally belligerently at them for just doing their job, right? So I guess I'll clarify, because I was kind of going in different directions in that question, kind of developing it as I went. I guess I'm asking less of a question of, do you have the right? Because I guess the answer would just be technically, like, I guess, right?
Will be yes, yeah.
Yeah, sure. That's something like, I guess, right? Like, yeah, you have a right to be on a public sidewalk yelling at the police. Yes, welcome to America, right? That's a right you have. But I guess what I'm asking more is a question of, you know, like, it's a can you versus should you, if that makes sense. Is that good behavior to display? And I think also that goes back to the Renee Good thing, right? It's like, putting aside the whole shooting incident in of itself, I firmly believe that, you know, it was extremely improper and imprudent of her to be behaving in the way she was before the incident that we're putting aside took place.
Well, how would you propose that she should have behaved, or someone in Minneapolis, for instance, should behave?
I would say that she shouldn't have at all engaged the ICE agents and let them do their job. It would be one thing if ICE, I hate making like World War II Nazi references, I think they're overused, but for lack of a better example, like if ICE was being like the SS, going around, you know, like taking people at the concentration camps, doing something that's so beyond the pale of being reasonable, right? Then okay, you know, get in their face if you're so brave, right? And if you are so brave, I guess more power to you and commend you, right? But you know, for the putting aside the crazy ICE agents who are doing the crazy things we're talking about, the majority of them, you imagine, are just doing their job, deporting or detaining and deporting people who are not supposed to be here. That as we said earlier, is at least at a base level justified, right? We agreed on that.
Well,
At a base level.
if that were the case, yes, but I just don't think that is the case in Minneapolis.
Well, I'm talking about the central case of what we're talking.
Okay.
Like, yes,
if ICE
I
agents-
acknowledge.
yeah.
I acknowledge like there are like abnormalities, probably too much. But like putting that aside, and I've seen many a video where it's just the ICE agent just doing the ICE agent thing. Like, okay, like I'm detaining someone, or even like the ICE vehicle just sitting on the side of the road, and people are just totally acting belligerently, just seeing like a blacked out vehicle with Texas plates on it, right? Again, that's not a question of rights, more of a question of prudence. Maybe is this justified? The can you versus should you
Right.
sort of question.
Yeah, I think if ICE were enacting their operations lawfully and rationally and with respect for the people of Minneapolis, I mean, if I'm going to make a direct quote about the Renee Good thing that uses profanity, I don't know what the whole, if that's allowed on this podcast or anything.
I'm going to have to bleep it out, but you can just say
You'll
it.
have to bleep it out.
Yeah.
But I mean, after Renee Good was shot, the ICE agent referred to her as a quote unquote f***ing liberal bitch, right?
Yeah.
Or lesbian, I guess was the word.
Yeah.
But, you know, they don't really see them as people that are worthy of their respect, which I know I might be using a specific officer as
Right.
one quote. That's anecdotal, but then again, 288 lawsuits of wrongful detention, which is more than double, I believe, of the 2025 number, and just underneath the number from President Trump's first term and Biden's term combined.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't think that's unjustified because I don't see ICE acting with any respect for citizens. And again, the government doesn't get its power from itself. It should get its power from the people, rather. And I mean, from the consent of the governed, right? And they don't have their consent, and they don't really seem to care. I guess is what I would say.
I see. And just one like quick clarifier: are you saying that it's justified? I'll give two examples. Like example A, ICE is just doing the ICE thing, as I think is happening in the majority of cases, genuinely. Because like, what are the videos that blow up? It's the videos of ICE behaving bad.
Yeah.
If it's ICE just like being boring and just doing the ICE thing, no one's gonna record that.
Yeah.
It's the same phenomenon with the BLM thing, right? It's just like, oh, there's so many videos of police acting badly towards African American men. It's like, well, that's because those are the only videos that anyone cares to record, and then after that, watch and replay and spread and put on the news, right? So back to the question I was going to ask you is like, would you say that behavior is justified in general, just because of the general behavior of ICE, or justified directly in the face of ICE misconduct, right? Like, for example, to use Renee Good as an example, let's say Renee Good, saw ICE doing something bad, right? Just keep it simple. And then she approached. Would you say that that's justified in a distinct way than if ICE was just like sitting there in their car and she walks up and is like, you guys are bad, ICE, and yelling at them, doing the whole thing?
No, honestly, I think both are equally justified.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that even if, like you say, ICE operations, the majority of the time are, what they're supposed to be doing, which, I've seen a lot of data that doesn't necessarily support that. And there's been a lot of arrest of U.S. citizens, like I said, based off of just racial profiling. Even if it's a minority of instances, it's a pretty substantial minority. And it's pretty, it's varied in what they've been doing as well. Whether it's ignoring the Fourth Amendment or tear gassing protesters or ignoring court orders, I think there is more than enough justification for resisting ICE, even if they're doing what is quote unquote their normal operations, because it's not just like anecdotal instances of ICE like doing bad things. It's a systemic problem, and I believe the entire agency itself is flawed and needs restructuring if it's going to continue to try to deport illegal immigrants lawfully from this country.
So your policy recommendation would it be just kick out like Kristi Noem, for example, out of DHS, and or I can't remember the what's the guy who leads CBP? I can't remember his name right now. But like one of the leadership and kind of like have them do restructuring, or are you on the more extreme side of, just do away with ICE and try to build a whole new thing? Maybe just get rid of those new agents, get them all retrained. I guess I'm not sure if your article went this far, but I'm just curious of your thoughts of like, okay, now in response, and if you could control the government in response to the problems and to the civil disobedience, what would you do with ICE?
Oh gosh, that's a tough question.
I know. I'm just curious where you're at with that, even if it's a partial answer.
I haven't gone that far in my research as to how I would tackle the issue from a policy perspective. I mean, that would probably take a whole team and like months of research. But I guess if my suggestion would be, if you see all of this outrage from the American public and it's this difficult to do your job because the people that are there like are protesting, and then you commit pretty bad acts against a lot of people that, again, violent protesting is one thing, peaceful protesting is another. I think if you're not even allowing people to really peacefully protest without the fear of getting tear gassed, like you gotta at least restructure something. I mean, there's some administrative flaw there. And I don't know necessarily if that is the organization itself or the people who are running it. I mean, I have my feelings about Kristi Noem. And a lot of the things she says are pretty rhetorically charged against illegal immigrants in terms of like them as human beings, which I also think is hugely problematic. I
would agree. Yeah.
So yeah, maybe start with Kristi Noem and then figure it out from there.
Just, I guess, and we're wrapping up now, certainly.
Yeah.
But I started thinking about Kristi Noem and her poor dog in that gravel pit. He distracted me. What was I gonna ask you? It is a very distracting thought of. Are you familiar with the whole like dog in the gravel pit thing? It was a book she wrote last summer.
Kind of.
And the dog ate a chicken out of her chicken coop.
Okay.
It was like a pup, really. It was like a small dog. And instead of training it or like giving it away if you really don't want to deal with it, she wrote this in her book. Like, she's bragging about this, by the way.
Right.
She took the dog to a gravel pit and let's just say did away with it.
Oh my.
It's just like,
like
the fact that I'm laughing because like, why are you going to brag about that?
Of course.
So stupid.
It's also shocking. Well, not even shockingly, but the fact that doesn't surprise me about Kristi Noem says, all you need to know.
Yeah. Oh man, what was I gonna? It came back after I processed that thought completely. I finally got out of that reverie thinking about Kristi Noem and her poor dog. So what I was gonna ask you, do you think perhaps, against all on this one, I'm just curious of what you're thinking here, having local law enforcement in some way be deputized, I'm not even sure how the legal mechanics of that would work, but to work with ICE, that would help. Because one thing that certainly I think is true, and maybe you want to push back, but I think this is certainly true, is a part of the reason, not the whole reason, but the part of the reason why it's so much more difficult to do the base mandate in places like Minneapolis, just because you're not only going against just like the vibe of the place, which is,
right.
You're going against the actual powers that be in the place who don't want you to not do the bad. Of course, no one wants you to do the bad things that we've,
right.
But like for you to do your actual job, like the Minneapolis, broader Minnesota government, in being a sanctuary city or maybe state, don't want you to be doing the actual by the letter and for. They don't want you to be doing it, right? They don't want to give you any help. And what I think might happen, and again, just want your thoughts here off the top of your head, even if you had Minneapolis police, Minnesota State Police, maybe even alongside some of these agents, Minneapolis, Minnesota people, they're actual officers, like they know due process. That they maybe can say, hey, this is not enough probable causes or reasonable suspicion, even little stuff like that. Or also just like the whole like stress of having to meet, I'm sure there are quotas here, right? Meet X quota,
right,
with no local support, with only the agents we have who are trained, for 3 hours. I'm being hyperbolic again, but you get the idea.
Right. Yeah.
If we had the manpower, if we had people who knew their communities more too, I mean, the local police know their communities more, right? Might that do a lot to help, even if it's a bitter pill to swallow for the community who, besides not liking the questionable stuff, rightfully observed questionable stuff happening, just don't want an immigration enforcement, if we're being honest. Minneapolis is very liberal,
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess the question is just like, do you think that'd help?
I mean, it would help in theory, but again, like you kind of are relying on the local forces to cooperate, and I don't know how much the Minneapolis police would.
Well, they wouldn't want to. At least the top brass, but I'm thinking of like not the pawns. I'm like the individual officers,
right? The individual officers
who will just take orders.
I mean, like in theory, that would work, right? I'm just not really sure exactly how ICE would enforce that it's working as well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess that could be a possible solution. This is a really complex issue.
It is. No. Again, and I'm not seeking like explicit answers for you. I'm just wanting to see where because you wrote about this. You obviously have like things you're thinking about when you're writing about this topic. So I'm just curious if I could draw anything else out. But no, I mean, if you don't, I'd rather you be honest and say, I'm not exactly sure, but here's what I'm thinking, than to just make something up on the spot.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, like I don't even know what my own personal beliefs on illegal immigration fully are. Right. And again, like as we've kind of discussed, that's not why I wrote this article.
Right.
I didn't write it about whether it's an op-ed, whether I'm pro or against illegal immigration. It's specifically about the way ICE is acting. And, I think if there was a scenario in which the local police could cooperate with them and kind of, like you said, be deputized and carried out by themselves, it would probably be cleaner, definitely more professional, and definitely more within the constraints of the laws. And I'm not sure how that would work. Yeah. I'm sure there would still be a lot of local resistance among like the citizens, which again is within their rights as long as it's a peaceful protest. But it would probably be more effective for sure.
Right. And I guess I'll close with this question because I think it actually perfectly responds to what you're just saying here. Although it might be more of a statement that you're just responding to, but I get the sense that dealing with illegal immigration already was an issue by itself for years. I mean, when Trump came on the escalator, his first words was like, "They're bringing crime, they're bringing drugs," all that. That's been an issue for at least 11 years, in the forefront. But it seems that ICE's particular response has created a separate political issue, a whole different political issue that is derivative of that first one. That if you are a proponent, like I am, for really dealing with illegal immigration, just is a headache.
I'm sure
that shouldn't have to be dealt with. I'm sure you are agreeing with it.
I 100% agree with you. Okay. I mean, I'm from Florida. I have a lot of conservative friends. I mean, I would say I definitely lean more left. But I understand that illegal immigration is a pretty major issue, at least for your guys' platform. But I also know most of my conservative friends who think that illegal immigration is like one of the biggest problems in the country are also very upset by the way ICE is handling this because, while they might be for their like mission, they also see how human rights have been violated. And I think that's, the key issue here. And I do think that's why ICE is has created its own like political problem.
Right.
And I think actually made its job significantly harder for itself by not being a little bit more prepared and, acting within the confines of the law.
Right. All right. I think that's a good place to stop.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll have you on in the future. I'll be gone next year, but
so sad.
This was a great episode. So I can
for sure.
I can certainly see you coming on. 'Cause you said you're a freshman.
I'm a freshman.
Oh,
yeah.
so I'm sure
I
you'll
plan
be
to
back.
make it back.
Okay. Well, again, I'm going to have you on, Zach.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right. Bye.
All right.